English Practice Today, the podcast from SBS News, the morning news edition of 28th May 2024. In this bulletin, a new rapid review into the domestic violence launched by the federal government. An Israeli attack on the Rafah camp draws a global condemnation, days after the UN's top court ordered a stop to the offensive. The Australian Human Rights Commission terminates a claim against Hawthorn by First Nations former players. A rapid inquiry will be held to advise the federal government on how to reduce gender-based violence. A panel has been assembled, and the first part of its research will be completed by the end of next month. It will consider all opportunities to intervene and prevent incidents of gender-based violence, including harsher sanctions for perpetrators and shifting attitudes about the issue quicker. A spate of recent high-profile cases has put pressure on governments to further address this issue. In Australia, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 6 men has experienced sexual violence since the age of 15. Women are the most likely to experience harm at the hands of an intimate partner. The federal government has promised to end violence against women and children in 1 generation. More about a potential treaty between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians in Victoria will be learned today. The co-chairs of Victoria's First Peoples Assembly will appear before the state's truth-telling hearings today. One of them, Rubenberg, says treaty talks with the state government will begin later this year. So far, he says the talks will focus on transferring decision-making powers to Indigenous people. He says there needs to be a reset to give Indigenous people economic opportunities that they have so far been denied, so they can create intergenerational wealth, much like other communities in Australia have been able to. In particular, he says, Indigenous people can be helped by receiving profits from projects on their traditional land. More than 2,000 people are thought to have been buried alive by a massive landslide in Papua New Guinea's northern Anga province. The country's National Disaster Center raised the toll in a letter to the United Nations after the UN initially put the estimated death toll at more than 670 people on Sunday. There are fears few survivors will be found, with treacherous terrain and difficulty in getting aid to the site. The UN's International Organization for Migration Papua New Guinea Chief of Mission Shahan Akot Prague says the updated figure caught them by surprise. We were really not expecting that, definitely not hoping at all. On the contrary, we were hoping that the figures that were communicated to us earlier, 670, could be revisited and could be reduced. But we see the opposite, unfortunately. So that is heartbreaking to begin with. Humanitarian relief efforts are ongoing, but we have a lot of operating on the debris, which covers an area of approximately 3 to 4 football fields. Quote. At least 45 people have been killed in Israel as airstrikes on a tent camp for displaced Palestinians in Gaza. The airstrikes in the southern city of Rafah came just 2 days after United Nations top court, the International Court of Justice, ordered Israel to end its military offensive there, citing the risk to civilians. Local health officials say, despite a global outcry, the toll on civilians, Israeli tanks continue to bombard eastern and central areas of the city on Monday, killing 8. Israel's Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari says the intelligence-based strike targeted senior Hamas officials. Quote, today, Hamas terrorists in Gaza fired 8 rockets at central Israel from Rafah, sending millions of Israelis to bomb shelters. Quote, Witness Fadi Duka described the events. Quote, "We heard the sound of a missile. We ran and found the street covered in smoke. We went to the house, didn't find anyone. When we checked over the wall, we found a girl and a young man cut into pieces." Quote. Earlier, for the first time in months, rockets were fired towards Israel's second city of Tel Aviv. Hamas armed wing claiming responsibility. And in sports, the Australian Human Rights Commission has terminated a claim against Hawthorn by First Nations former players and their partners after the parties failed to reach an agreement. The Commission has run out the case, believing there was little chance the Hawks' former staff and the ex-players could come to an agreement. The players and their partners now have 60 days to take the matter to the federal court. Hawthorn Football Club said in a statement they remain committed to resolving the matter fairly and quickly for everyone involved. And that is all for this podcast and for my practice.